Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Dobson, performance coach and founder of LeaderShift Incorporated. I'm also head coach of the National Farm Leadership Program. If you're tuning into this video, you probably are familiar with me. I'm that farmer from Fairfax who has had this fascination with leadership and leader effectiveness inside of the ag space. And this has been on, and as you probably heard, I've had a lifelong fascination with this, and it's really kind of stemmed from this notion of seeing ordinary people being able to do extraordinary things. And by extraordinary, what I mean is ordinary people being able to do something that they didn't think that they could. And it had a very significant positive impact for them. When I've seen that, when I've been able to do that for myself or when I've seen other people, I've always wondered whether or not this was something that was trainable, that we could actually practice for and get better and better over time. And it's been a lifelong fascination, like I said, and it even led me to go back to grad school it'll be almost 6 years ago now, to try and discern whether or not this is something that's available to everybody. And if so, what's the process? What's the map for this? So what I want to share with you over the next 30 minutes is what I've learned about that map and what I've learned about this process. And then I want to talk about why this is so important to agriculture and why other people are thinking it's going to be important to agriculture, and really focus on what kind of problems leader development is solving right inside of farms and in the ag space in Canada right now. And I want to put that all into this larger idea of I think the real positive message about where this is all going and what it's going to mean for us going forward in agriculture. So what have I learned about leadership and leader development? I have to say, when I got into this, I did not think I was going to end up being a coach. I didn't think I was going to end up running a leader development program. It's taken me in places and spaces that I never thought possible, largely because what I thought leadership was and what it turns out that it actually is were vastly different things. And so I'll tie into that as I go through this. But this is what I've learned in the last 5 years. The first thing I want to get clear right here, right now, is that leader development is actually possible for all of us who want it. But yeah, it is deceptively challenging. And I think this is one of the most difficult or challenging parts when we get started in this, is that when I describe leadership and leader development and the things that we teach and coach, many people have this idea that it seems all very common sense. And I think for the most part, a great deal of it is. But the challenge is that we have a very difficult time actually doing it. And this is because there's so much underneath the hood about what it is that drives leader effectiveness that for the most part, and in previous history, up until I'd say very recent, in the last few years, we haven't understood very well. And it's that kind of understanding that's now being programmed into leader development offerings that's actually driving more and more effectiveness. And I think that's the exciting part, because I think most of us have all had a notion or an idea of where we've decided or tried to want to do something and try and improve or get better. And maybe it's looked like that we were making progress at the beginning, but eventually it just seemed like we just went right back to the way we always did. And we're understanding that more and more about what's behind all that. And it's now being sort of programmed right inside of leader development offerings to address that front and center. The second thing that I want to emphasize about all this, and this is the part I think that particularly the people that I work with, who are coach or who I work with inside of the National Farm Leadership Program, is that the first thing I think they're quite surprised at is that how measurable leader effectiveness is. And that really this whole space of leadership, which has been often coined as being sort of soft skills or the soft side of it, or it's sort of what, even to the point of almost this sort of negative idea of touchy-feely, that actually, in fact, leader effectiveness is quite measurable. And that it's to the point where we know very well what are the behaviors and the competencies that are strongly correlated to performance and those that are correlated to high levels of business performance. And we're able to measure them. And if we can measure for them, that actually points us in a very strong direction that we can help coach people and guide people about what they could focus on to actually increase their effectiveness. And I think the most exciting part for me, at least, as someone who sees the opportunity for this, both as an individual, but also I see for agriculture on the whole, is that we're seeing all of this rigor, this actual, this real sort of research-based information about what is driving high performance and successful businesses. And it's able to drive that and meet up with technology. And the power of that is that we're actually able to take leader development right into the farm and in many cases, right onto the tractor seat. I think the part that really bothered me the most about leadership and leader development is that for the people who I think had that I saw were actually quite successful and had been doing very, very well, they were actually people who weren't from the farm so much. They were people who left the farm, who went to town and worked for very large organizations and were the benefactors of very good leader development offerings, many of them over time, and they were able to improve themselves. And that was the benefit. That was the benefit of actually being of access. I think the power in all this now is that we can create developmental opportunities and make them accessible right to the farm in a way that we haven't been able to do that before. And that's the part that gets me excited the most, because this is going to mean this is something that's available to everybody now. And it sort of feeds this opportunity and this belief that I've had that I actually think that leader effectiveness is going to be as important to the success in agriculture as financial literacy was in the 80s and 90s. I think it's going to have that big of an impact. And so as I go through the presentation, I'm going to illustrate that this is something that's emerging. I think it's already here, and that there's a lot of other people who are starting to see it too. So what am I talking about? What is the actual problems that leader development can solve on the farm and in the ag space? And I think this is the most important. This is sort of the practical, what's in it for me response to that kind of a question. And the first thing I'd like to say is most people that I coach or who I train, most of them will report this overarching notion of wanting and needing more bandwidth, which is this idea that they just want to have more ability and capacity to handle the businesses that they've created. We know we've seen a lot of farm expansion, a lot of farm growth, and it's becoming more and more challenging. They want to deal with what's going on around them day to day, and they also see opportunities and challenges that are coming up in their windshields, and they want to be able to have enough, what I would call almost freeboard, to be able to have the enough resiliency and enough excess capacity that they confront it head on, and that it's not going to put anybody under undue stress, and it's not going to be a threat to the business, that they can handle whatever comes at them. And so this actually shows up in a bunch of different ways, and I just want to code this for everybody and sort of consolidate what I've heard. So the first one is partnership. Now, to be true, nobody comes to me and says, Kelly, can you help? I want to build more partnership in my organization. Virtually no one has ever said that to me. But what they do say is that they really want to find ways so that it doesn't feel like they have to constantly push or pull or constantly struggle to get everybody on the same page and working together more effectively to achieve the opportunity or challenge that's in front of them. And what this means is that really what they're saying is they really like this ability to be able to think and act more strategically, and it's a constant struggle. The definition we use inside of our program for partnership is this idea where everybody feels responsible for the success of whatever it is they're jointly engaged in. And I think that's sort of the big need that people come, is that they really would want to feel like that they can get more people involved, and that everybody is shouldering their fair share of responsibility, and they could do so in some sort of collective way that made it feel like they could just work better together. The other thing that this folds around, and actually what stops that happening, is this idea of culture. And again, I've never had anybody come to me to say, I'd like to actually improve the culture of my farm and my farm business. What they do say, after we start diving into under the hood about what's going on that's sort of getting in the way of effective partnerships, is they'll often say that they'll report stories of things like that there's drama and politics going on, and it can be between inside or even familial drama and politics that go on inside of farm family dynamics, or it could be externally with vendors and suppliers. And that they'd really like to figure out how they could change those relationships over time so that they were actually more effective, and that they weren't the kind of relationships that kind of kept the organization mired into the everyday way of operating that simply is not sufficient to handle the kind of challenges and opportunities that are currently presenting themselves. And I think overall, the overall one that comes through at the end is that the people who show up, and I really say this, whether or not they have positional authority in their farm business or not, the people who contact me and I have conversations with, they pretty much self-identify by doing that they are the leader. And once we get right down to it, all they really want is to be able to show up better. They want to show up more calm, focused when it really matters, which is particularly under pressure. They know that they're good and that they're capable under normal circumstances. But it's these ever increasingly extraordinary circumstances where they know there's all kinds of opportunity, that they know that it's just too hard, and they'd like to find a better way to address it. And that they'd like to be able to confront sort of these the hard truths and these sort of gut-wrenching situations collectively with everybody, and in a way that can actually move that conversation forward in a positive way, instead of the sort of traditional culture that exists where oftentimes we don't adequately deal with it, and we certainly don't do it in appropriate ways. And I think at the end, I think the final point I want to make on that is that people want to be able to achieve and do all those things without this feeling that they're putting it all on the line. And this can be in terms of confronting these things and not worried that there are going to be relationships put at risk, or they want to feel like they can tackle or can confront an opportunity or challenge and they can focus all their energies on it, and that they don't turn around and see something else that has been left or unaddressed, and that now that's at risk. They want to feel like they can handle all of it. And one of the ways that I see this all the time, that oftentimes I have to sort of bring up to people to sort of make them aware of it, is some very old traditional notions around taking care of myself and getting the work done. And then oftentimes this idea of that they can achieve without the consequence of low resiliency and high stress. And so we often are really excited about how that's starting to fit now inside of leader development training. And it's actually starting to show this front and center. Like, we're actually starting to get some real facts and data around the notion that there's it's actually really important that everybody has an active recovery practice, that everybody's on their best game all the time, and that we don't worry about taking care of ourselves after the work is done, or as I like to say, when the ground is frozen. That we can put those two together in a way that allows us to operate at our best selves more often. So how is all this possible? So this is where we get into the actual, how are we making this happen? Because traditionally, when I've said all that I've said, that I've just previously said, most people will say, Kelly, I completely agree with you. There's nothing that you're saying that I don't support. But underneath that, they'll go, I just don't believe it's actually possible. And if they do, they say, I don't think it's possible for me. I don't see how I could make an impact on my own farm or my own family business, because the way that we've been showing up is generational. It just seems like it's too entrenched. There's no way that we could shift that. And then, to be admittedly, I even have had conversations with farm advisors who are openly skeptical, as supportive as they are. They're openly skeptical about whether or not this is an actual aspect that can be nudged, that can be moved, that can be improved, and whether or not people are really interested or would want to pay sufficient attention to it. And so what I want to say to all that is that I totally get it. And like I said in my opening comments, who hasn't had doesn't have multiple experiences around wanting to do better, trying to do some form of improvement, and having maybe some initial success, but then over time things just kind of go back to the way they were. We've all had it. But the exciting part is that more and more we know why that occurs, and we're actually able to address that as part of this process. So what I want to show you right now is a low resolution map or process about how we actually can get this to happen for people, and we can get it to happen right on the farm. So the first thing I want to talk about here is awareness. And I'm going to share this with a bit of a story, but I also want to connect it to this larger overall map. The first thing I'll tell you is that awareness absolutely governs leader effectiveness. And it's one of the most strongly correlated measurement of actual leader effectiveness. To the extent that someone is self-aware, that actually drives their leader effectiveness. And so the story I want to share about that is that I realized for myself, who had been doing all kinds of things, I've been running a farm and had chaired so many different businesses, or commodity organizations, in different roles and capacities. I went back to grad school thinking that I actually had a pretty good understanding of what leadership was and what I needed to do for me in order to be more effective. That lasted till about 4 days into my first residency at grad school, when by that following Friday evening, I had to sit very, very quietly in my residency room and realize that I didn't have the slightest clue what leader effectiveness was or what leadership was, and that I knew that what was really at play here was something that was completely beyond my awareness, And that's when I realized I had a whole bunch of work to do. And so what from that experience, what we've realized and what the research shows is that getting people aware of their current effectiveness is the first step in order to improve it. And the exciting part about this now is that we can accurately measure it. So one of the real quick ways that we quickly make people self-aware about where they're showing up and how they're showing up so they can actually figure out what to do next is that we actually assess them. And that's one of the exciting parts, is that we've actually got a pretty good, there are pretty good tools available now that aren't personality assessments, they're not preferential assessments, but they're actually leader effectiveness assessment that allows people to see how they're showing up, and at the same time provides a bit of a path or a prescription about where might be opportunities that, if they focused on it, could really make a difference in how they show up in the farm for greater results. And I think that feeds into this next idea, is that so often people will take development offerings and they might even include some form of an assessment, and they might get some insight, but after that, it just quickly goes away. What we find, and what is most helpful, is that we need to take all that data and then say, what of this is most critical, that if we actually focused on it with our attention every day for a few minutes, that over time, that would actually have us showing up more effectively, and over time would have more, not only have positive results for myself, it starts rubbing off on how I interact with other people, and then starts rubbing off on them. And that's the power, how we can actually start shifting entire farm businesses and the actual cultures within those businesses. And then the next part is this idea is that we have to actually put skills in people's hands. And this is the part I think I've been particularly excited about, is that LeaderShift, we teach probably, I would say, north of probably 24 different skills inside of the development programs that we offer. But what we realize is that for many people, there's going to be a handful of skills based on their assessment and the focus they put on what is the thing that's going to really make performance increases noticeable and impactful, that there's some skills that support that. And we're able to put those in people's hands. And the part that I want to share with you is that in this most recent year, we actually introduced in a more meaningful way our Presence Builder program. And our Presence Builder program is this notion of increasing people's presence, which can simply be described as being aware of what is happening when it is happening. And that this is something that can actually be trained for, and we can develop our ability over time. We've been putting that as an underlying set of practices inside of the actual program. And what we've been getting actually for feedback is that many people are reporting that that's been some of the most useful and helpful skills that they've learned through the entire development offering. And so I feel risky saying that, because it actually goes in places and spaces that when I went to grad school and we were talking and learning about leadership, it wasn't even talked about. This is this notion where leader development is now incorporating a whole bunch of different practices and putting them together. So it's much more of a holistic approach. And so I'm actually very excited about the notion that we're able to bring the skills that are going to be most impactful and put it right to the individual and what they're actually going to need. And lastly, it's this idea of practice. One of the most hallmarks that we know in order to get actual performance to happen for individuals is that they need to know what it is they're supposed to be practicing, and then they actually have to practice that practice. And so we've actually come up with different tools and abilities that actually support that to happen. And I think that's been one of the more things that I've been sort of humbled and sort of excited to see, is that we've actually again brought some technology into that. And one of the things we've been able to do is sort of track what people's actual practice was supposed to be. And as we actually meet with them and coach with them over a period of time, we're able to identify to them that actually in many cases they've actually met or even exceeded the kind of performance that they were looking for 3 or 4 months ago. And it's been very exciting to remind people that there actually has been actual measurable and noticeable improvement in how they're showing up. And that because what we know about really driven people, and I'll full ignition, that's actually me, that we notice that we're really, really good at moving the bar of progress to the point where we won't actually acknowledge the fact that we are actually making progress. So this idea of practicing and being able to put some technology against that to help really measure improvement even in the smallest amounts, because we know that actually performance improvements is not measured in gigantic leaps forward, but is measured in the small things and noticing those small things over short periods of time. And if we add that up, that's where we can actually say, wow, we are in a significantly improved position than where we were before. that sort of describes the overall map of what we're doing for leader effectiveness and leader effectiveness development. And I just want to sort of pivot here now and sort of move to this idea that there's lots of different people that are starting to notice this now as being something we need to be putting our attention on. And so this just one group I'll put up, Royal Bank of Canada's Farmer 4.0. This was an actual project and a study that Royal Bank did, and I think it's going on just a little over a year now, where they were looking at what's the skill set going to be needed in the future to ensure that Canadian farms and farmers are going to be successful in the future. And so I pulled this a quote out of their overall project, and it said deciders, which I would put as either the farmers or actually say the leaders, is that they're going to need to manage ever larger and more technologically complex operations. And then in order to do that, they're going to need the leadership skills and the technical expertise in order to go along with that shift. And so I only raise this because I think that overall there are players in the larger ag space that are starting to say, this is something that's going on globally, but it's time now that Canadian agriculture start putting its attention on it and doing so to ensure that we are having the kinds of levels of success necessary that's going to keep us successful in the future. And I think this leads to where I think where people are already noticing some of the actual signs of this what I would call to action, the sort of need to sort of think about this idea of developing ourselves. And I just want to do a sort of a shout out to Farm Management Canada and all of the partners that were involved in the Healthy Minds, Healthy Farms project, which identified this notion that there is something like 3 out of 4 farmers are reporting, moderate to very high levels of stress. And at the same time, there's actually a pretty low adoption to this idea of written business plans, or even what I would say this real notion of being able to think and act strategically. And that the connection that was basically made was that if farmers were able to think and act more strategically, how might that actually support lower levels of stress? The part that I would like to feed into that conversation is that I think that in the middle of that, between these two signs of low adoption of technical solutions that would really help farmers manage risk on their farm and the high levels of stress, that these to me are two very clear signs that this of leader effectiveness, that this is an actual human development challenge that says that our ability to actually develop ourselves is getting in the way of us actually being able to access kind of some of the really, really amazing strategic management best practice, both tools and advice that's available today in a way that it's never been available before. And the consequence of that is that we're seeing that we've got high to very high levels of stress being reported in a pretty significant population of farmers in agriculture. And what I see in the middle of all this is that I think there's a proactive approach here that needs to exist, that I think the sort of the idea of leadership and leader effectiveness, I think captures in a way that few other models or approaches have. And I really see this as a real, we're just seeing the signs of a real need for people to think about ourselves and developing ourselves so that we can develop our businesses. And then the positive response to this is that we're going to have higher levels of well-being, including that of mental health. And for me, I choose to take a very positive look on this, because I see this in sort of the terms of looking at my parents' generation. And when I was a little kid and I was riding the school bus and going in and out of farms and seeing how my mom and dad were farming relative to my neighbors, the one thing that I definitely saw was this, and it was really, really emphasized to me, and I think there's still lingering feelings about this, is that really farm success is really underpinned by hard work and then having good skills. And if you've got some smarts, then you are probably set up for success. And I still think that exists today, except what I know, and even what the research will tell you, is that being smart and having a very high work ethic and some sort of technical ability, that those are considered entry-level abilities in order to be considered an effective leader, an effective farm business manager. The bigger game is that we're going to have to be able to work better with ourselves, to have better capacity for ourselves and our ability to be able to work with more and different people. And I think that's the part that I think is so different from today than even when I started farming, and certainly my parents' generation, is the number of technical experts that we're in relationship with on a consistent basis. I mean, it's up in multiples of the experts that we have at our disposal that can actually really set us up to be successful. But we have to effectively leverage their expertise, and that's the part that's being a real challenge. What happened, and I think in the post 1980s, is that there was this real notion that there was some management that needed to be added into that. And I think what I remember about the 1980s is that there was some lowering prices. There was really low levels of rainfall, in some cases no rainfall in bigger parts of Western Canada for sure, and that we had really high interest rates. And very quickly what we knew is that there were certain management abilities and understandings about things like debt servicing, amortization, total cost of borrowing, and basic farm budgeting that simply were not there, that actually quickly put farms at risk. And so this notion, and I think the adaptation to that is that I think ag school training and education quickly adapted over a period of years and over decades, where farm management has become extraordinarily mainstream today, and we're combining that with that hard work ethic, and we're actually achieving the kind of modern results that we're seeing, and we're actually able to really put into practice a great deal of the technology that's available. But yet, I think there's this next big ask, is that there's more there than what we can possibly handle, and that the bottleneck is now us. It's not actually the technological solutions, and that we're going to have to work at developing ourselves first, so that we can think and act strategically as an everyday way of operating. And it's not just me, that it's us and a collective sort of management approach on side of our farms, and that is the path to achieving even greater results. And I think this is what Farmer 4.0 is trying to tell us. I think this is what the research is basically telling us. And I think that we're starting to see that this is starting it's going to be very much where the puck is going to be. And actually, in many cases, that's actually here today. And there's solutions available to us to make that happen. And so when I talk about impact and results, the first thing I want to say is that there are people experiencing the benefits of this right now. There are leader development offerings available, and I'll just cite up one of the National Farm Leadership Program participants who was featured here in Country Guide, and talking about their positive experience of leader development. What I can tell you is that the lowest hanging fruit that I see in terms of the results for leader development training early on is people are definitely reporting lower levels of stress, generally speaking, that they're feeling like they're not in it alone, that they're able to engage people and critical people both inside and outside of their farm businesses for greater results. And they're able to start having the kinds of conversations that I think over time are going to lead to an everyday way that farm is going to be able to think and act strategically as the going sort of normal culture of that farm, as opposed to patterns that may have served in the past but are no longer scalable or sustainable, particularly if we're talking about farm and farm success. So we're already seeing it's available, and I think I'm nothing but encouraged about that. So as I wrap up this presentation, I just want to say to you that the evidence is in. Growth is actually possible for anyone who wants it, and I just encourage you to think about where you might be in all that, and that if you were even just a slightly more impactful and effective in your daily operation, how might that actually impact your farm business? And so I just want to encourage you that I think that this is actually kind of a pretty bright time in agriculture when it comes from the development space, because of all the things that I've talked about. And I think that it's accessible in a way that is not yet. And I think to me, it's just like, it's long overdue. I'm glad this time has come. And I'm just excited about what that's going to mean for farmers and farm businesses, and for agriculture in general. I appreciate you guys listening to me, and I just want to thank you for tuning in, and hope that I talk and see you soon.